keep an eye on that.
Yeah.
All right. So I imagine people will still be coming in from the waiting room, but just because we have only an hour with Julia and we want to make the absolute most of our time, I would like to get started. So welcome, everybody. This is Writing for Audio, an evening with podcast producer Julia Botero, who produces the Modern Love podcast. And we are so excited to have her here today. Julia, do you want to wave just so people can see you?
Hello, nice to be here. Thank you.
So my name is Sharon Friedner, and I'm the Associate Director of SPARC, which is the new name for what used to be the Career Options Resource Center. And SPARC stands for Supporting Your Purpose with Action, Resources, and Connections. And so this event is hosted by SPARC. Karen Rank is also here. You want to wave, Karen? Karen is the director. And it's also hosted by another program that's part of SPARC, which is called the Hampshire Writers Advisory Council. The Hampshire Writers Advisory Council is a group of alumni writers of all genres who help provide opportunities like this one for student and alumni writers to explore the landscape of writing careers. So we are so lucky to have Julia here today. I'll tell you a little bit about Julia. She started at Hampshire in the spring of 2002. And at Hampshire, she studied a combination of creative writing and feminist literature. She now produces the Modern Love podcast at the New York Times, but she got her start in public radio, producing interviews and news segments for All Things Considered and Weekend Edition. And she's also created podcasts at Gimlet Media and reported on local politics and agriculture with North Country Public Radio. So if you have not yet had a chance to listen to the Modern Love podcast, I highly, highly recommend it. It's lovely. It's an antidote to all of the sadness and depression of the past couple of years. And it's just so very human. So if you're shy of the idea of romantic love and listening to that, if that's not where you're at right now, just know that Modern Love is about all different kinds of love. And it's just very beautiful. So I've been really enjoying listening. Okay, so I want to just point out in the chat, there are some links so that you can find out more about the various things that I just mentioned. So go ahead and grab that if you want. And with that, I will turn over the floor to Julia.
Hi, thank you, Sharon. Thank you. That was really nice introduction. I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I have this some presentation to share with you. So just bear with me for 2 seconds. Okay. Oops. Oh, 1 second. Okay. All right. So just because I want to get to know a little bit about the people who are here and about you guys and what you're interested in, I would love for everyone to share in the chat some of the podcasts that you listen to. So either your favorites or ones that you've heard recently that were interesting, or even ones that you're curious about. If you could just throw some in the chat, and could kind of take a moment to do that and kind of know where we all are in the realm of podcasting. Oh, Ear Hustle is a favorite. Go down. Moth. Great. Yeah, Heavyweight's a great one. Song Exploder, totally awesome. Right. Oh, I haven't heard of that. Okay. Okay, great. So as you all know, there are so many different podcasts out there now. The field is just full of different kinds of ways to get audio. Back when I was starting, back in, the early 2000s, there was just public radio. Podcasting is pretty much new. I mean, I think the first podcast that really got mainstream was Serial in 2016. And then from there, the field has exploded, which is really good news for you guys because it means that there are jobs out there. And back when I was starting out, there weren't really a lot of jobs out there in public radio. And I was kind of like you, I was just like struggling with trying to figure out, I mean, I don't know if any of you are struggling with trying to figure out what you're going to do after you graduate, but that was a concern of mine because I'd spent a lot of time writing and reading. And I just wasn't sure how I could translate those skills into a situation where money would be exchanged for my services. And so at that time, This American Life was on the radio and I listened to NPR pretty consistently. I was alone a lot in my room studying. So that was kind of like I had something I had on all the time. And so there were definitely a few things that stuck out to me from that era. So Radio Diaries was a show, and it's still a show, and now it's a podcast, but it was a show on public radio that gave people microphones, mostly teenagers, or they would sometimes send reporters out on the street, and they encouraged people to record their own lives. And so this was basically the first instance of me coming across basically characters, kind of the characters that I had been writing about in some of my creative nonfiction classes. This was a presentation of character in a new format. So I just wanted to play you a little bit of what I was hearing. This is a more recent version of this, what they call Teenage Diaries. Radio Diaries would give teenagers these microphones and these big tape recorders to go out and record their lives. So I'll just play a little sample for you.
You're listening to Radio Diaries, and before we start today's show, we want to give a shout out to our fellow Radiotopians at
Test. Okay. Hi, this is Tembi. It's time for my prayer. Every morning when I wake up, I'll run off to my drawer, take out the mirror and look at myself. I say, hello, HIV, you trespasser. You are in my body. You have to obey the rules. You have to respect me. And if you don't hurt me, I won't hurt you. You mind your business, I'll mind mine. Then I'll give you a ticket when your time comes.
So this was an example of a situation where a character was allowed to basically write in sort of like a memoir type way for radio. And then there was another writer that was featured on This American Life that really, to me, crystallized the way that writing could translate into audio. I'm gonna go here really quick and play this. His name is Scott Carrier. And maybe you've heard of him before. He's a contributor to This American Life for a while. This is a story that aired on the show. And in this story, this is just a time in his life where he talks about a time in his life where he was paid to interview people who were suffering from schizophrenia. So this is the beginning of the story that I'm going to play for you.
It took an hour to give the test. Scott was paid $30 for each test he gave.
It's Hourglass.
The people he gave the test to got $5.
I was hired to interview men and women in the state of Utah who receive Medicaid support for treatment of mental illnesses, generally diagnosed as schizophrenia. I had little understanding of schizophrenia before I began, and I have little more understanding now. I took the job because I had no other. I took the job because I just quit my steady job, my professional job, after realizing that what I wanted more than anything was to put my boss on the floor and stand on his throat and watch him gag. Then my wife moved out, took the kids and everything. She said, I've thought about it, and I really think it's the best thing for me at this time in my life. And so I took the job interviewing schizophrenics because it was offered to me and because it was all there seemed to be. And it seemed somehow predestined, a karmic response that could not be avoided. It would only be temporary, something to get through the summer. And I was told that they needed someone willing to drive around the state through the small towns, searching out individuals who were often transient and prone to hiding. I like to drive, I like to travel, and I like the idea of pursuit. So I took the job and did the job, and my life will never be the same.
So let me get back to this. So that's an example of writing that basically that is made for and adapted for audio. And there are certain ways that that kind of work is distinguished from work on the page, which we'll get into soon. But this is all to say that this was the kind of work that was out when I was graduating from Hampshire. And that is what propelled me to consider, hey, I can use the skills of narrative that I have to basically transpose this into audio, to basically work in audio and see like what I can do in that field. So this is all to say that like creative writing and audio work together really well. And in order to make, you know, a good podcast, to have a podcast really sing, you have to have good writing. And I'm talking mostly narrative podcasts. I know there's like a lot of podcasts out there. You guys mentioned a bunch. And what I'm focused on are podcasts that are story driven. So this is what I do now. And so I'm going to play you a little bit of Modern Love. This is the first episode of this season. And for those of you who might not be familiar, Modern Love is a column in the New York Times that focuses on their personal stories about love in all of its forms. And so we adopt the column into a podcast. We have voice actors read the essays that we select, and then we have either like an author interview at the end of the essay, or we have like another segment that's like somehow related to the theme in the essay. So this is just another example of how writing is kind of given a second life in audio, as it were.
When Lou Reed died, I got on Facebook and found out just how many friends had chosen "I'll Be Your Mirror" as their wedding song. I wasn't one of them, but that song, more than any other, taught me about love. I listened to it endlessly the summer I was 16. My father had strongly suggested if I wanted to stay in his house for the summer, as the divorce agreement had decreed, I should take a job doing hard physical labor in Saratoga Spa State Park in upstate New York. My father's idea was to heal me through hard work and the grounding power of nature.
So that gives you an idea, again, of just how this kind of writing, memoir writing, is amplified through music, and just, yeah, music in this podcast to just really let it sing. And so it kind of brings it completely new life. It's like a new form, a new medium for that kind of writing. So the kind of podcasts I'm talking about now are these narrative podcasts. And if there's anything that you take away from this presentation today, I want you to take away the fact that you as writers already have the skills that are essential to have in creating a narrative podcast, meaning you already know what it takes to have, what it takes to have a story. You know the importance of character, the importance of a narrative, a narrative arc, plot, tension, and resolution. These are all things that is essential when creating a podcast where there's a story like at the center. And so some of these podcasts that I'm talking about are, for example, S-Town, which someone mentioned. S-Town is a story about, well, it's basically created by those people, the creators of Serial, and it's a reporter, Brian Reed, who goes down, I believe it's Alabama, to interview and spend time with a clockmaker. And it's a story about sort of the discoveries that Brian Reed makes about this one man. And there's also a lot of things going on, but it's told through 6 episodes. So it's, and each chapter is a story unto itself. And so this is the kind of work where it's very clear how the basics of story and everything that you learned in writing is at the center of this podcast. So I'm just going to play a little bit for those who are not familiar with this. Move this over.
This podcast is supported by
Oh,
Santander
sorry.
Private Client designed to meet your needs. Whether searching for a forever home or
Clock breaks. A clock that's been telling time for 200 or 300 years. Fixing it can be a real puzzle. An old clock like that was handmade by someone. It might take away the time with a pendulum, with a spring, with a pulley system. It might have bells that are supposed to strike the hour, or a bird that's meant to pop out and cuckoo at you. There can be hundreds of tiny individual pieces, each of which needs to interact with the others precisely. To make the job even trickier, you often can't tell what's been done to a clock over hundreds of years. Maybe there's damage that was never fixed or fixed badly. Sometimes entire portions of the original clockwork are missing, but you can't know for sure because there are rarely diagrams of what the clock's supposed to look like. A clock that old doesn't come with a manual. So instead,
So that's Brian Reed, and that's the beginning of this chapter, which is basically, he spends about 2 minutes just talking about cuckoo clocks. And then we go into the story. So this is an example of a podcast that where good writing is essential to its success. Then there's The Truth, which is a fiction podcast. And this is a kind of podcast where fiction writers actually submit their piece of fiction and to the producers, and the producers work with the writer to bring that piece of fiction to life by hiring professional actors, by having an engineer add sound design and music. And so basically it's a whole new life that this piece of fiction gets to experience, and a whole new audience and medium. So let me just play a little snippet so you get the idea. Actually, I have to do this.
This episode of The Truth includes strong language and sexual situations. With that, I do not do superheroes. What's wrong with superheroes? It's just a costume. What? I'm an actor. Not here, you're not. Here, you're Clooney. Hi, Freeze. I'm Batman. Hi, Freeze. I'm Batman. Hello?
Hi, is this Alan?
Yeah, speaking.
This is Evelyn. We met at my nephew's bar mitzvah a few days ago.
Oh, right. Yeah. Yeah, of course.
So from there, you can hear all of the different sound design, basically the scene setting that is created with audio to make this story come to life. And then The Experiment is another podcast that is more like, the writing here is reporting. So it's like 2 reporters go out into wherever, like I think in this one episode, they're looking at the origins of spam. So they go to a diner where people eat spam, and the writing is really writing around tape. And so in the industry, tape is basically the audio that you record when you're out in the field. And so the kind of writing that you have to do basically is using the audio that you record to help you build the story, which is a different kind of writing than if you're writing a fiction piece, or if you're writing kind of more like a long monologue at the beginning of a podcast, for example. So I'll let you just get an idea of what this sounds like for those unfamiliar.
WNYC Studios is supported by the New York Community Trust. Whether you want
That spam is the main attraction of Austin.
Our parents all ate spam.
Yeah.
Where are you guys all from?
Michigan. And I live in Florida now.
Fargo, North Dakota. I'm darn proud of it too.
People from all over the world travel here to visit the famous Spam Museum.
It was used heavily by the troops.
Yeah.
The North Dakotan that we met at breakfast said that he served in the military. He worked in the kitchens where he cooked spam.
I think that's where my dad got his taste for it.
And the woman from Florida said that her father was first introduced to spam during World War II.
He was all over the Pacific.
Oh yeah, well it's funny that you. So of course, I told her about my grandfather. American GIs would throw cans of spam at the kids.
That's why the GIs would have.
So there, if you can hear, she's writing into the tape. So she's telling a story, but she's using that recorded audio to help propel the story. And that's just like a different form of writing in podcasting that takes a long time to master, by the way. So there are like there's very simple tenets of writing for audio and how that differs from writing on the page. And so something that's like you need to remember, and also you will recognize after hopefully this presentation, is that the writing that you hear in podcasting, most of it is writing, even though it might sound like someone is just talking on the mic. If you're listening to a narrative podcast, so like any podcast from Gimlet or NPR or Pineapple, it's all written, and there's scripts that basically guide everyone. But the trick of it is that it sounds like you're having a conversation. So when you're writing for a script for podcasting, you need to make it sound conversational. And you need it to sound simple, because the biggest fear of someone like me who's a producer when I'm making a podcast is that I will make someone bored, that the listeners will turn off the podcast and listen to something else. And so my entire goal when I am writing a script is to engage. And it's the same thing that if you were writing like something for like a lead paragraph in a newspaper, you want that lead paragraph to grab your reader. The same thing happens with podcasting, except the trick is that in podcasting, you can rewind, you could press that like 15-second, rewind button, but few people do that if they don't understand something. It's more like you would just get confused, and then you just wouldn't understand what's going on, and then you wouldn't like the podcast and you just turn it off. But the goal is to keep listeners engaged, because unlike a newspaper article, I can't like go back and read the 2 paragraphs that came before if I get confused. Like I just kind of am lost. So the goal is to be as clear and simple as possible. And also you want your writing to be scene-based. So you want it to be super, super visual, so that you can kind of, because in podcasting, we don't have the opportunity to show someone something like you would if you were writing a script for TV or for movies. So the difference is that we have to make people use their imagination to create scenes in their heads, as they would if they're reading a fiction, a piece of fiction. But for podcasting, it's a little bit different, just because you have to use fewer words, and much more simple, but you just have to paint the picture as as much as you can, as simply as you can. So there's a lot of like economy of language that comes into this, which is, if anyone's ever written poetry knows it's actually like very difficult. So those are basically like the main tenets of writing for audio. Here's an example of a script for the podcast I work on, Modern Love. And so what you'll see the script on the left, the one that's marked up. This is a script of the essay that was printed in the New York Times magazine, the New York Times column, Modern Love. So what we do for the podcast is we literally like cut and paste the text of the essay onto a Google Doc. And then we go through, actually, this is done by my editor. She goes through and she marks the words that just like don't sound good to the ear, or like are too complicated, don't sound conversational, are just like need to go. There's a lot of cutting that happens. And so, this is basically the process. It's the first process that we do when we adapt an essay from the page to audio. So what you see on the right here is the script for the episode that's going to air next week. And so this is basically what it looks like. We've condensed the writing. We've made it really clear. We've all, of course, like added music to this because in audio, we have the advantage of using music to basically exemplify the emotions in a story. And so that's like another cool thing about working in podcasting is that music is used as a way to, you don't want to have to like, you don't want to notice the music very much, but you just want to help it like kind of lift the words up. And that's something that, is an advantage. You can't do that if you're writing on the page. You're just hoping that the person who's reading it is feeling those emotions. It's not like we're trying to make anyone feel anything. It's just that we're just kind of like helping with that feeling. And that's just kind of a little trick and the nice thing about working in podcasting. So we can talk about the sort of the roles of what goes into making a podcast and like how the teams are segmented. So you all might be familiar with all of this. This might not be news to you, but the host of a podcast is the voice. It's the person that you hear on the mic. And so this person is essential. All of these roles are very essential to making a podcast, but the host gives the show a sense of personality, a point of view. They usually share stories with the listener. They kind of are the guide that takes the listener from the beginning of the podcast to the end. So there's like millions of examples of a host. There's Anna Martin is the host of Modern Love. Ira Glass, of course, for This American Life. It's just the first person that you hear and the person who leads you through. The producer, you don't normally hear from. That is a role that I play on Modern Love, but they're basically behind the scenes. And this is the person that does the scheduling, does a lot of the interviewing. In some situations, the host interviews as well, but you're the person that is, if a host is interviewing a guest, you're the person taking notes while the interview's happening. And you're the person, if you're working on a narrative podcast, where you are the writer. So you would be the person who would be writing in and out of the audio that you collected, the recordings, also known as the tape. You'd be the person who's writing actually what the host will say to introduce, for example, Modern Love. We have the host say something in the beginning before the essay starts. And so I'm the person writing what she will say. Of course, she comes in and will change things around based on like what she would actually say. But, you're basically guiding what's happening. You're the person that's basically making everything happen. And then there's the editor. And so this is also an essential role. I can't tell you how many narrative podcasts I've worked on where the editor wasn't around as much as I wish they were, because they're what takes your writing from good or mediocre to great. And it's the same kind of way that like a newspaper editor would work with you to make your, whatever you're writing better. And so they're essential, especially in narrative podcasting, to make sure that everything makes sense, that there's a real narrative, that there's clear stakes. Because I know and this is something that I didn't really understand when I was still in school, but, and I think it might be more like exemplified in podcasting, but you have to like give a reason for someone to care about like why they're listening to your story. And so that has a lot to do with like whether or not the stakes are present in a narrative, which is something that I didn't know and it took me a long time to understand when I was like after school, is just like, why are we listening? Why do we care about this story? And stakes are also this thing that keeps you wanting to listen. So it's like, for example, if it's very like kind of low hanging fruit, but like in a true crime podcast, the stakes are like, who killed this person, or we need to figure out who's the murderer, who like killed all these people, so that we can stop this from happening again. So it's just kind of like the reason why this narrative exists and why you would care. And again, the editor is that person who is really making that story and those elements of that story very clear. So this comes to, so all of this, like, there are ways that you can become and obtain the positions of host, producer, or editor now in the world, because there's lots of jobs out there. There's lots of podcasts that are springing up left and right. There's lots of new podcast studios that are created, and there's a lot of different paths to get to where you want to go. And I think the kind of advice that I can give you is, if you have an idea of what you want to do, like if you think, oh, I think I want to be the person that's writing, I want to be the person that's like collecting tape and interviewing people, you could either go the very formal route and get an internship with, NPR, WNYC, This American Life, Gimlet. It's very competitive. And it took me a long time to get any of these internships. The route that I took was more of a DIY route. I moved to New Orleans in 2005 and didn't get an internship. I just made radio stories by interviewing people I met on the street, followed my curiosity, and just kind of taught myself how to do this. That path is like a little bit longer, but I do think that path teaches you it gives you a lot of independence, and it also shows you that your own creativity and your own ingenuity is actually like the bread and butter of this industry. So all of these fancy internships, what they really want are like, they want people who are curious, who are passionate, who have tried this before. So it's not just like this is a kind of profession where someone is just going to give you a job. It's mostly you have to kind of try things out for yourself, because we live in an age now where we have access to smartphones, and we have garage bands, and we basically have all of the tools that it would take to kind of experiment with audio already at our fingertips. So it doesn't like hurt at all to just do your own thing. And then, you know, eventually find your way to one of these companies if you're looking to work with them. But I can only tell you what I know and from my experience, but there's many different ways to land a position, you know, as a writer for a show. So don't think that like an internship is your only way to make it, basically. And again, you can make your own. I would say that like what I came across when I was working at Gimlet, which is it was a startup and then was acquired by Spotify, but it was a small startup when I was working there that only focused on narrative podcasts. But people want ideas. People want not only ideas, but just new podcasts. And so everyone was thinking, okay, what's going to be the next hit podcast? What's like a cool project that we can work on? So it's basically like the sky is kind of the limit. If you have a curiosity to, you know, pick up a mic and even just like record a piece of writing that you've written on your own and just kind of like hone that and make it your own, that there's absolutely nothing stopping you. And I would actually encourage you to experiment with the medium and to try new things and, you know, teach yourself as much as you can, because there's a lot to say for initiative, especially in podcasting. And you already have the skills that, well, some of the skills that you'll need to make it in narrative and podcasting. I mean, the audio editing skills, those come with time. They're not impossible, but you know, it takes some practice. But I would encourage people, if they can, to like try recording something and editing it and using GarageBand or some kind of free software to put something together. Okay. And so these are just a page that I put together of some resources that are really helpful if you are interested in learning more about how to write for radio, or how to network and meet people in the industry, or even if you want to just go to like an intensive. The Transom Story Workshop in Cape Cod is a great place to get the nuts and bolts of how to edit audio and how to interview people and take the first steps in creating your own podcast. So again, none of these are necessary, but they're super helpful. Transom.org. I have memories of sitting in the airport lounge and I discovered Transom, and I went nuts just reading all of the essays that they have. They have some of the best producers in the industry share their wisdom from working and writing and interviewing over the years. So I would highly suggest that you go over there, and everything is free and you can just like have a great time going in there. And then also Third Coast is like this really fun annual kind of it's like, I would say it's a networking event. It's more of like a learning festival where, again, like the best people in the industry come together, share the work that they've done over the past year, and basically with the purpose of having everybody become better writers, better interviewers, better with sound, and just in general, like better storytellers. And I have to say, it's like one of the coolest ways to be introduced to this world. So that's all I have for you today. So if you have any questions for me or anything that you wish I had like gone over, but I hadn't, please ask. Let's stop sharing my screen.
So I know some people are on mute and sometimes it's hard to jump in and we can't always see you, but you can wave and just speak, or you can put questions in the chat.
Hi, thank you so much for this presentation. That was so wonderful and it's so nice to meet you. I was curious if you could talk a little more about the process of what you said, having music lift the words up, because I personally find that very challenging and am struggling to do that. And so if you could just speak more to that.
Yeah, so in the industry, that's called scoring. And so scoring, it's basically, it's a way, again, to like bring emotion and just interest into the piece of writing or into a piece of reporting. And so there's a certain kind of music that is appropriate for podcasting. The kinds of things that you don't want in music for podcasting is usually music with lyrics or music that is too distracting. You want it to be as minimal as possible, because the point of scoring in audio, in podcasting, is for the scoring to be almost unnoticeable, because you don't want it to distract from the content. So it's a really delicate line that actually I've had to learn recently, because I had actually never scored anything before I got this job at Modern Love. And I was just kind of blown away by how minimal the music needs to be in order for it to kind of work. And so that's just like a very special thing about music in podcasting that is different than if you're like, I don't know, adding music, scoring for a film or scoring for a TV show. You know, it's like almost not there. And so, you know, someone who is like excellent at this is the person who produces Song Exploder, Rishikesh Hirway. He is a composer and also a musician himself. And so he really understands like just how music and words work together to create a story. And so it's also like, what's interesting with scoring is that you can kind of play with like tempo. So a lot of the times in an essay for Modern Love, I'll find myself like you need to match the rhythm of the music that you're using, even though it's like pretty low and minimal, you still have to match it with the words. And so a lot of the time, essentially, I'm moving the words around in space on my editing software in ways that kind of seem unnatural, like there's like a lot of space in between words. But when you hear it underneath the sound, the music, it makes sense. It kind of, you feel the rhythm. And so it kind of, again, like feels really good to the ear. And everything that we do in audio is about like, does this sound good? Like, does this make my ears happy, is one way of putting it. And so it's a lot of trial and error, like, oh, no, this is too harsh, or this is off tempo. Yeah, so does that answer your question? I don't know if you want me to, you had a more specific question to ask.
No, that was great. That was super helpful. Thank you.
Yep.
I just wanted to say thanks to you. This was great. And one additional thing is that a good way, I think, to get into audio these days is through like a lot of local NPR member stations. Like I got an internship at WNPR in Hartford, Connecticut, and they're kind of like the internships at NPR and Gimlet can be super competitive, but the local smaller ones are a little bit more accessible for sure.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up. I did not even bring up public radio, and yes, local stations, go local stations.
Yeah.
So I feel like a lot of people forget about them, but yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah, and I was just gonna ask, in terms of like new stories that you do for Modern Love, are they all so do people like pitch to you or pitch to the podcast, or do you like ask other people to submit stories, and like how do you decide which is a good one that you want to work with and turn into a radio story?
So yeah, great question. So we work through the essays that have already been published through the newspaper. So we work with the editors of Modern Love, that's Dan Jones and Mia Lee, and they will send us the essays. I mean, they don't have to send us the essays because I know where to find them. They're just like in the paper. And we go through, or I go through and read the essays and figure out, okay, which essays kind of stand out and would be good for audio. So basically it's the essays where they have a lot of scenes that are very scene based. Those that are not like very internal. There's some Modern Love essays where the person is trying to figure something out and they're all in their head and they're not really interacting with anyone in the essay. And so that typically wouldn't translate great for audio because again, we need to keep people's attention, and for that we need scenes and we need like just some sort of like visual. We really like it when the essay has a main character who's trying to like figure something out, and where there's like a really clear arc where they'll maybe start being like, man, I really have a hard time with my dad and I wonder how I'm going to fix this problem. And by like the end of the essay, something will have happened where they'll have some sort of occurrence, like some sort of change will happen. Well, by the end, it's like, okay, like now I'm coming to a deeper understanding about my dad and our relationship. So that's pretty much how. There's a long list of criteria too that we kind of check off to see, okay, this would work for the podcast or not. But there's really no one comes to me and pitches essay ideas. You really have to go through the direct channel, just because, we work with the New York Times and they really pride themselves on having a certain standard. And so it's like, if you get published with Modern Love, that's like the gateway to be on the podcast. So it's kind of like you can't really, unfortunately, like come in the back door for an essay. Like you kind of just have to go through like the main gates. But we are experimenting with having people, be interviewed on the podcast that haven't written an essay. So it's a little bit of like, I feel like it's a little exclusionary that we only work with people who've been published in the New York Times. So we are trying to like invite other storytellers on in some way. So we're figuring out how to do that, but it wouldn't be like through reading their writing. It would just be like through telling a story to us. So, but there's also a thing called tiny love stories, which are these smaller, like, I think it's 100 words, where you submit a story of like 100 words, and they publish a bunch of those. I think it's like every week they publish about like maybe like 4 or 5. And so that's it's like a good entryway. A lot of people get that opportunity. It's kind of like much more difficult to get your essay published, but I think the tiny love story kind of opens that gate a little bit wider for people who want to share something. So I know that like classically, it's very difficult to get published in Modern Love, and something that people try for a long time and still, struggle with. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Julia, are you seeing the question in the chat?
Oh, no, I'm not. Sorry.
It says, I have a question about where you get your inspiration from. Earlier, you spoke about going on the street and interviewing random strangers. Could you speak of some others?
Yeah. So so that was back when I was in New Orleans and I was just breaking into podcasting. And I wouldn't say it was inspiration. I would say the driving force is curiosity. I was really shy all through college. And I remember that when I discovered the power of a microphone and a recorder, it changed my life, because then I suddenly had a reason to walk up to people and ask them questions that I had been too scared to ask because I didn't like have a reason. And I'm just like not a chatty person. I'm not someone who just like walks up to people and chats with them, but I was curious. And so that was a tool for me to talk to people and to hear their stories. And then from that, it kind of ballooned into like, me wanting to tell stories and tell other people's stories. So I would say if you're looking for inspiration, I think you should follow, again, your curiosity. Like what like questions do you have that you'd like to know the answer to? And how do you get there? So like you could literally be like, hey, I wonder, I can't think of anything, but basically you can ask yourself a question and then you can follow your curiosity to that answer. And so maybe that's like interviewing the man who repairs shoes, that is on your block. And you're kind of like, who even like, goes to a cobbler these days? And maybe you'll like spend an afternoon with him and talk to him about like how long he's been repairing shoes, like what his business is like, or maybe you'll have like a bigger question. Like there was this show on Gimlet for a while called Mystery Show that people loved, but it was the entire show was composed around this question that the host Starlee Klein would have. And she'd be like, or basically she kind of framed it as like a mystery. She was like, I'm going to solve this mystery. And the mysteries were like, not really mysteries, which is like the funny thing about it. It was like, I think one episode was like, how tall is Jake Gyllenhaal really? And then she basically would call a bunch of people, like interview people who thought they had met or like had met him and thought that he was like 5'11". Like she would just record like every conversation she had, and then she would like write around her conversation. She just like would write monologues, and she would write the script for her little journey. And she just made this whole story about her journey of like discovering how tall Jake Gyllenhaal really was. And so that again is just like a person who has a kind of dumb idea and a dumb question and like follows that thread to the end. And that like whole question, that whole like journey that you go on can be your story. So I would just like know that you like have like inspiration doesn't have to come from outside. It's like already in you, and you just have to like follow it and like pay attention to yourself, and then get out there and start making something. But thank you for that question. That's a good question. It took me a while to kind of realize like, hey, I can just make it up.
So I'm just noticing the time. And Julia, I just want to ask if you have any last words, something that you want to say, and then I'll close with letting people know about some upcoming events.
Yeah, I just, if you have any questions in the future, if you, if anything comes up or you are confused about next steps, you can contact me. I don't know if I I think my contact information will be available, but feel free to reach out to me. I'm on Instagram and on Twitter. Here, I'll just put in my handle on Twitter. It's just JBody. But you can just feel free to anytime you want to have a one-on-one conversation, I'm very open to talking to people and kind of just letting them ask questions and figure out what the next steps, because I know that this industry can be kind of hard to crack into. So I would just say don't give up if you're really determined, and make as many friends as you can.
Julia, are you willing to share your email for people who aren't on Twitter or who aren't?
Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you so much.
Oh,
so I love hearing you talk, and I love the questions, and I just wish we could go on and on, but I do want to respect people's time. And I want to point out that I just put a bunch of upcoming events in the chat. So for those of you who logged on a little bit later, these are all events through Spark. Spark is the new name for the Career Options Resource Center, supporting your purpose through action, resources, and connections. And so if anyone's on campus, join us tomorrow at the Enfield Fire Ring for s'mores and these really beautiful free mugs with the Spark logo on it. And then on February 24th, we have Navigating the Digital Economy, which is a really cool workshop with the writer and artist John Reed, who explains how to navigate sort of marketing your work and using the online landscape to show your work and sell your work probably too. Then on March 24th, there's another Hampshire Writers Advisory Council event called Getting Paid to Write, 3 alums, 3 paths. And that's all about making a living using your writing in communication. So that should be really cool. Just another path for making a living as a writer. And then there's some links that I pasted in. And one really great way to keep in touch with writing related events is to join the Writing Careers mailing list. And all of these events go there. And there's also a Spark mailing list. If you go to our website, you can find that there. And that has all the events, writing related and other types of events there. So once again, Julia, thank you so, so much. I hope everyone will tune into the Modern Love podcast. The new episode just came out yesterday, and the last season was just unbelievably fantastic. I was in tears half of the time. So it's definitely worth a listen. All right, so good night, everybody. Enjoy your evening and take care.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.